Rescue workers say many of the victims suffocated and foamed at the mouth.
То есть по 30 и более крылатых ракет и ракет класса воздух-земля на каждую цель.
Les réactions de la communauté internationale, et cela va-t-il avoir une influence sur la suite de la guerre en Syrie?
Why would you launch a strike before an investigation?
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the stories we're covering this week. Mission accomplished again, allegedly. Syria, the media on red lines, humanitarian intervention, and the need for military action. The enduring sexism on Italy's airwaves. Have Italians missed their Weinstein moment? Facebook and its fact-checking initiative in the Philippines provoke a backlash from supporters of President Duterte. And one state-owned TV channel in Moscow provides Russians with news they can use. How to survive World War III.
Кому особенно несладко придется в подземном мире, так это сладкоежкам.
They say that truth is the first casualty of war. In the coverage of Syria, you can add evidence, context, and balance to that list. When footage of an alleged chemical weapons attack was beamed out of Douma, it set off an outcry and lit the fuse for counterstrikes. The narrative from many in the Western mainstream media echoed their own governments. A red line had been crossed. It was a transgression that could not go unpunished. But those demanding evidence that the Assad government was behind the chemical attacks, the skeptics questioning the rush to launch, were given short shrift. For media outlets in the US, UK, and France, particularly the 24-hour news channels, there was less concern about cause, proof, than the telegenic effects of war. WMDs and Iraq do come to mind. A big part of this geopolitical showdown is being fought out over the airwaves. And when it comes to state propaganda, you've really got to hand it to the Russians. If only their media could bring the same scrutiny to the Kremlin that they do with the White House. Our starting point this week are the skies over Syria.
Now comes word tonight that Syrian...
Sometimes news coverage has a quality to it that is almost timeless.
Under the cover of darkness, dozens of U.S. Tomahawk cruise missiles.
This has been a horrific violation of international norms. That is Assad's use of chemical weapons.
Именно там они планируют под камеры инсценировки химических атак Асада.
The Pentagon providing evidence it says shows Assad was behind the war crime.
None of those sound bites were from this past week. They were broadcast the last time the U.S. military targeted Syria in April of 2017. But they could have been. The script this time around was beyond reminiscent.
The attack was launched in the dead of night.
Right down to the relative lack of journalistic scrutiny of the images that provoked the airstrikes, whether they did indeed amount to proof that the initial attack involved chemical weapons, let alone whether Assad government forces were responsible for it.
First and foremost, the key question of waiting for evidence. That's one of the most fundamental things that seems to be missing from much media discussion. What we have seen in Syria is footage taken by people on their mobile phones.
Civilians, adults and children dead and dying.
But there does seem to be a total abandonment of any kind of critical scrutiny. An idea almost that it would be immoral to question these images. So I think that's quite a serious failure on the part of a lot of the main Western media.
The main point made in the Russian media was that there was no chemical attack, that there was no need for it, and that Russia was being blamed for something it had no role in. When the Western media talked about the chemical attack as a fait accompli, the Russian media, not just the state ones, but more liberal, balanced outlets, were trying to understand what the reasons for such an attack would be. Our Western colleagues don't even want to hear this kind of questioning.
This war has claimed 500,000 lives and displaced millions more. But the United States and its allies have chosen to intervene publicly only when the fighting is alleged to have gone chemical. Chemical weapons are politically beyond the pale. More than 160 countries have signed the Chemical Weapons Convention of 1992, which outlawed their production and their use. The way allegations of chemical warfare are reported, the way it looks on screen, triggers a response. The footage is horrific, the suffering is evident.
Haunting images, difficult to watch. We can't even show you the worst of it.
However, the images are not graphic in the way conventional bombing can be. There's no blood. News editors, who shy away from putting the dismembered bodies of bombing victims on TV, saying audiences cannot stomach such pictures, can show these. And once the images turn up in Washington and other Western capitals, the politics and the accepted rules of war do the rest.
It is not about images specifically. It is about politicization of images in relation to political agendas. The attention that chemical warfare gets in relation to Syria has actually less to do with Syria than Western European history and European publics, because suffering by bombings and by barrel bombs and etc. arguably can be more damaging and kills more people.
Images, of course, are always necessary to provide a kind of moral impetus to bombing. There has to be a kind of like line that's crossed morally to justify why they're acting now. This one had a lot of video, and of course that's going to incite a kind of reaction. And because the only way that the United States, Britain, and France know how to react is to bomb things, that's what they did.
It is 2 a.m.
Governments come to office with political agendas. Some news organizations have them too.
We are at Fox News headquarters in New York and Washington, bringing you the very latest developments.
Back in 2003, Rupert Murdoch's media empire, outlets including the Fox News channel in the US and more than 170 newspapers around the world, strongly backed the invasion of Iraq.
Either the Iraqis use poison gas and biological weapons or they don't. If they do, then all bets are off. The United States can go ahead and shoot anything it wants whenever it wants.
These days, they are similarly hawkish on Syria, although some of the tactics have changed. One of Murdoch's papers has targeted critics of the airstrikes. The Times, based in London, published a list of British academics, calling them apologists for the Assad government. The paper was sending a message that would have registered with journalists as well as university professors.
The day that Britain, France, and America launched missile strikes at Syria without democratic authorization, the front page of the Times and the editorial was devoted to basically smearing myself and my colleagues as Assad apologists. The main thrust of the argument that to question your own government is to be somehow an apologist for Assad or a Kremlin puppet, I think that, frankly, is a really dangerous kind of path to go down.
The Times is a right-wing rag that smears everyone who questions the war narrative. They want to create a chilling effect. They want to make sure that if you're opposed to this bombing, that you're going to be smeared as an Assadist, a Putinist, a war crime denier. Classic tactics, same stuff they used in the run-up to Libya, same stuff they used in Iraq. The goal is to create the acceptable parameters of debate and to punish anyone who veers off that even slightly. Journalists are easy to intimidate because they need to work. And if they get branded as a conspiracy theorist or an Assadist, they don't find work.
If conspiracy theories and a succession of voices sympathetic to the Assad government are what you are looking for, the Russian media space is the place to go.
Примерно месяц назад в сеть попали фотографии, предположительно из съемочного павильона белых касок в Восточной Гуте. Это, очевидно, костюмерная, а вот и гримерка, бутафорские человеческие конечности, бутылка с киношной кровью.
But if state-controlled channels like this one really wanted to get to the truth, they would question why the Kremlin's forces in Syria are denying weapons inspectors access to the site in Douma. They don't. And they're far more interested in civilian casualties caused by Western airstrikes than when the planes bombing Syria are from Russia.
Американцы и их союзники орудуют как тать в ночи, пока люди в домах еще крепко спят.
What Russian TV hosts and commentators stress is that in a confusing conflict, clouded by the fog of war, they are providing viewers with a perspective they will not see elsewhere.
There's a whole wave of fake information, of rumors in all directions, and the Syrian conflict is just one of them. It's not even about censorship, it's about the inability to verify what's happening. When I talk to my sources, I just don't know whether what they're telling me is true. And the worst part is that it's impossible to verify. I report both positions, but I don't know which one of them is true. This is the misfortune of modern journalism.
Unfortunately, a lot of the discussions on media around Syria have little to do with Syria. and they have much more to do, it seems, with geopolitical struggles.
Talking about Syria.
We don't see nuanced discussions around what's happening in Syria. What we see is a lot of political positioning, a lot of shouting about this is fake news, this is not fake news, and really does not help the situation in Syria or the suffering of Syrians.
We're discussing other media stories that are on our radar this week with one of our producers, Meenakshi Ravi. Meena, a court in Moscow has banned one of the biggest messaging platforms in Russia, Telegram. What's that about?
This began with the Russian media regulator, Roskomnadzor, demanding that Telegram hand over its encryption keys to the Russian intelligence service, the FSB. Now, those codes would have enabled the security services to monitor the private messages of up to 15 million Russians, and Telegram refused to give them up. Its CEO, Pavel Durov, a Russian who lives outside the country, posted on his Telegram account a letter addressed to the head of the FSB, saying that if all they wanted was a pair of keys, they could have the ones in the picture. But the case then went to court, and this past week, the judge ruled in favor of the FSB, and now Telegram is inaccessible in Russia.
You mentioned the 15 million Russians possibly affected by this, but hasn't the Kremlin itself come to rely on Telegram as well?
Yes. For instance, Dmitry Peskov, President Putin's press secretary, routinely used Telegram to schedule briefings with journalists. But according to him, a law is a law, and if it is violated, we will search for an alternative. There is one more angle on the Telegram story. It is also the messaging app of choice in Iran, and the authorities in Tehran have issues with it, also regarding encryption. So we'll be watching developments there as well.
Social media platforms are also in the news in the Philippines, where supporters of the president, Rodrigo Duterte, are urging Filipinos to get off Facebook for good. Why is that?
The issue is fake news and what to do about it. Last week, Facebook partnered with two Filipino news organizations, Rappler and Vera Files, to combat the spread of false information. Now, these fact-checkers will be flagging bogus stories and debunking them. Duterte's supporters have issues with one of those news sites in particular, Rappler. One of Duterte's high-profile backers, Paula Defensornak, posted a message instructing her followers to migrate to the Russian social network, VKontakte, so that they could get the uncensored truth. Nak also said the new fact-checking partnership would likely result in the shutting down of her Facebook account.
But hasn't Duterte himself been complaining about fake news in the Philippines?
Yes, but he accuses Facebook's fact-checking partners of dealing in fake news themselves. We've reported before on Rappler's critical reporting of Duterte's so-called war on drugs and investigations into the president's personal wealth. Duterte has accused Rappler of being run by Americans and tried to have them shut down earlier this year. So it's no surprise, actually, to see this reaction from the pro-Duterte crowd.
Okay, thanks, Meena. It's been slightly more than 6 months now since a newspaper story in the New York Times about a Hollywood producer, Harvey Weinstein, set off a tsunami of sexual abuse allegations that took down dozens of well-known men and gave birth to a hashtag that would go global, Me Too. The Italian version of that hashtag, quella volta che, translates to that time when, but that's where the similarities end. In the U.S., prominent figures in the news media, Matt Lauer and Charlie Rose among them, were pushed from their televised pedestals. In Italy, there have been very few names named, and much of the scrutiny has been directed at the accusers rather than the accused. However, by bringing out some of the worst tendencies in the country's male-dominated media, the story and the way it's been covered have enabled activists and certain journalists to draw attention to the deeper institutional issue here, systemic sexism. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on the Italian media, the role women play on television, and some of the people who say that they, too, would like to see change.
This is Asia Argento, one of Italy's best-known actresses. In October last year, the US magazine The New Yorker published Argento's allegations of sexual assault at the hands of Harvey Weinstein. The reaction Argento received in the Italian news media was very different.
Denunciare tutto 20 anni dopo, io lo trovo addirittura un po' vigliacco, oltre che triste. Non sei vittima, sei complice.
in quelle condizioni avresti potuto andare a dire di no.
Continua a dire che l'ho voluto. Scusate, continua a dire che l'ho voluto. Allora, mi sembra francamente.
Io ho sentito.
I interviewed Asia Argento a few days after her story was published in The New Yorker. She couldn't stand the public abuse anymore. The editor-in-chief of the newspaper Libero was extremely brutal, really attacking her.
La realtà è che se uno vuole ottenere dei favori e dà delle prestazioni sessuali, a casa mia si chiama prostituzione.
Io non ritengo che fossero sessisti.
I wouldn't say his comments were sexist. You have to know the man. It is well known that his journalistic career and his reputation are based on how direct and how blunt he is, how crude even.
Le donne sono più zoccole degli uomini.
He cuts to the chase.
Punto della situazione.
È stato un caso. Asia Argento's case is really a typical example of the recurring stereotypes and misrepresentation in media coverage of sexual violence cases against women. There's a tendency to split the victims of sexual harassment into two categories: the innocent ones and the women who asked for it.
Quando una prima acconsente e poi se ne pente, e allora sì che togli credibilità alle storie delle donne che veramente vengono violentate.
Una cosa che mi ha colpito particolarmente.
Something I was really struck by is that in much of the coverage of the Asia Argento affair, the article or the report would be illustrated with a picture from a film she had starred in which she played a lap dancer who kissed a dog. It was as if to say, look how dubious her morals are.
Visto la dubbia moralità di questa persona?
È un'immagine che ti fa capire una certa disponibilità a fare qualsiasi cosa pur di entrare in un film, o no?
I think the treatment of Asia Argento proved to be quite illuminating in terms of why women won't talk or why they may be reluctant to point the finger at powerful figures.
Figure di potere.
The treatment of Argento contrasted sharply with what was happening in the US media, where allegations of harassment were being met with solidarity.
Let me be very clear. There is no excuse for this alleged behavior. It is systematic and pervasive.
And accountability.
It was a stunning headline to wake up to. Matt Lauer, the longtime host of the Today Show, has been fired.
6 months on from the Weinstein revelations, more than a dozen major media personalities accused of harassment in the United States have either resigned or been sacked. In Italy, there have been no exposés of harassment in the news media industry. Yet, according to Solon De Luca, a television presenter and producer, such stories are not hard to find.
Very often, before becoming a journalist, they used to say to me, "You want to become a journalist? Come out with me. If you want the job, you need to do something for me." Sometimes it was more subtle. "I would like to see you tonight, in a dress." I got harassed when I worked at RAI, our public broadcaster. Then, when I was at Sky Italia, one night, I was working late, alone with my editor-in-chief, and we disagreed on a couple of things. He looked at me and said, "If you want to play who's got the bigger dick, you're making a big mistake." I was quite frightened, to be honest. I didn't know how to react. I was speechless.
Harassment is everywhere in Italy. Just because there have been no denunciations to date doesn't mean it isn't happening in the media as well. The problem is, it's difficult to expose such cases, especially when they happen in the industry that is supposed to be doing the exposing.
Italian media, Italian television especially, have become notorious for how they treat and represent women. Objectification, stereotyping, and worse are common. Last year on Channel 5, Italy's second most watched channel, the talent show Amici staged an elaborate prank on a pop singer.
Emma viene chiamata in studio, ma un ballerino nostro complice si rivelerà molto attratto dal suo corpo.
What happened on the set of Amici was an extreme case, but very much part of a trend that began on the same TV network in the 1980s. With the liberalization of the media, Italy's future Prime Minister, Silvio Berlusconi, founded the Mediaset empire. Semi-naked showgirls, usually alongside much older men, soon became the formula to follow. So much so, they got a label in the industry, the veline.
This term refers specifically to the women who featured in a satirical news show from 1988 called Striscia la Notizia. They would deliver the news to the two male hosts, who would then read it out. As competition between TV channels intensified, the presence of beautiful, young, half-naked women became a standard gimmick in TV entertainment. Mediaset especially offers a rich gallery of examples. Paperissima Sprint, Tiki Taka, Ciao Darwin. There are lots of shows that still use women this way.
Okay, there are still veline on Striscia la Notizia, but it's in the name of satire. You could make the same criticisms about cheerleaders at sport events in the US.
In a way, it's like a beauty pageant.
Americans love to give us moral lectures, but they even have cheerleading competitions. To me, this seems much more sexist. While the men are shown as athletes, the women just have to throw their legs up in the air. I think that's disgraceful.
The veline are the symbol of a way of making TV. The concept of a woman who's on stage and maybe dances, but doesn't speak. They don't represent actual women. It's an idea that was manufactured to serve the entertainment industry by taking a stereotype to the extreme. It was a way to satisfy a particular idea of what the average Italian viewer wants. A viewer that, paradoxically, is always assumed to be male. There's never an average female viewer. There are no male veline.
The fact that it has overwhelmingly been men deciding what Italian audiences want to see on screen and in the papers only partly explains the enduring sexism in the country's media. After all, male executives dominate media boardrooms in most countries. Another factor, a more telling one, is the power imbalance between men and women in Italian society. According to a recent index by the World Economic Forum, Italy has the widest gender gap in Western Europe. But some see signs that things are changing, slowly, for the better, including in the media.
In Italy, there's a divide. On one side, the older, conservative people who don't acknowledge or even see the problem. On the other side, there's a younger generation who are more open, more worldly, and more critical. A major difference between the era when the veline became popular and today is that we're no longer limited to just Italian TV. It's much easier to see what's going on in other parts of the world.
There's no question that sexism in Italian television is alive and well. But there has been a change in the way such blatantly sexist practices are received by the public. For instance, in March 2017, there was this RAI program, Parliamone Sabato, which asked why Italian men have a preference for Eastern European women.
Perdonano il tradimento, è vero? Sì, sempre.
C'è stata una grossa reazione.
There was a big reaction against it on social media, to the extent that the producers decided to cancel the show. The changes here have not been as dramatic as we might have seen with the Me Too campaign in the US. But awareness is growing, and society is changing, slowly. We all have to make sure that these baby steps continue and get ever bigger.
Uno dopo l'altro, sempre di più.
As for Asia Argento, since her bruising encounters with Italian media, she has said the country's climate of tension and culture of victim blaming was too much for her and her family. And she spends much of her time outside Italy.
And finally, just prior to the airstrikes against Syria, a good deal of hysteria was circulating online in Russia. And that provided one state-owned TV channel in Moscow with an alarmingly obvious story opportunity. It decided to prepare its viewers for World War III. It was a 4-minute-long segment on Rossiya 24's evening news program, where the Kremlin-owned channel suggested some essential items for life in a bunker: iodine to protect the body from radiation, rice and its 7-year-long shelf life, and rule number 1, fewer sweets, more water. Noted. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
Если полистать соцсети и телеграм-каналы, на что только не наткнешься. Пишут чуть ли не про грядущую Третью мировую и про то, что к ней надо срочно начинать готовиться. Но если вдруг все-таки нашлись те, кто поддался панике и решил спустить все свои сбережения на неприкосновенный запас, ну, расскажем, как не потратить деньги зря на ненужное. Ну, вернее, расскажет Евгений Тишковец. Евгений, приветствую.
Здравствуйте.
Что брать посоветуете с собой? Бункер.
Алексей, продуктовый набор судного дня включает много позиций, но основной принцип комплектования НЗ должен быть такой: меньше сладостей, больше воды. Кстати, далеко не все продукты действительно стоит брать с собой. Например, из круп дольше всех хранится рис, в среднем до 8 лет. От 3 до 7 лет хранится овсянка, а вот срок годности гречки не более года. Традиция велит при любых потрясениях и катаклизмах запасаться макаронами, но этот продукт профессиональные выживальщики не советуют брать за собой в бункер. Хранить макароны можно только в герметичной упаковке. В открытом виде они быстро отсыревают и портятся. Кому особенно не сладко придется в подземном мире, так это сладкоежкам. Шоколадки, конфеты, сгущенное молоко – все это тоже придется оставить в прежней жизни. Знатоки, в смысле люди, считающие себя таковыми, рекомендуют держать в бункере запасы лекарств, в особенности медикаменты с йодом. Они помогают организму справляться с радиацией. Алексей?
Спасибо. Евгений Тишковец специально для паникеров.